They say in New Orleans, the river doesn't forgive mistakes. It just keeps moving, taking everything with it. But what if the biggest mistake you ever made was the one act of kindness nobody was supposed to notice? Sylvia Marchand was 31 years old, and the only thing standing between her and complete collapse was the night shift at Delacroix Memorial Hospital and a pair of worn-out sneakers that had stopped squeaking somewhere around the 3rd year of nursing. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in the sense of existential regret, though there was plenty of that. She'd applied to nursing school because her younger brother, Toby, had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder at 14, and she'd watched nurses work and thought, I can do that. I want to do that. What she hadn't calculated into that dream was the cost of Toby's ongoing treatment, the second mortgage her father had taken before he died, or the specific cruelty of a hospital billing department that didn't care about your grief timeline. She owed $178,000. The number lived in her chest like a stone she couldn't cough up. On the night everything changed, Sylvia was coming off a double shift on the 4th floor of Delacroix, the pediatric oncology ward. It was a Tuesday in late October, and the hallway smelled of antiseptic and the peculiar sadness of a floor where children fought too hard for things they should never have to fight for. She was carrying a clipboard she didn't need anymore and a cup of coffee she'd microwaved twice and still hadn't drunk. That's when she saw the boy. He was sitting on the floor at the far end of the hallway, right outside room 412, the one that had been empty for 3 days since its previous patient was discharged. He couldn't have been more than 7. He was wearing pressed khaki pants and a white button-down shirt that was untucked on one side, like someone had dressed him carefully, and he'd been sitting in that hallway long enough to start coming undone. His dark hair fell over his forehead. He was not crying. He was just staring at the linoleum floor, counting the tiny flecks in it, or something equally quiet and heartbreaking. Sylvia stopped. She'd learned a long time ago that when a child sits alone on a hospital hallway floor after 9 p.m., you don't walk past them and tell yourself it's someone else's job. She crouched down to his level. Hey, buddy, you lost? The boy looked up. His eyes were the color of dark amber, and they held an expression no 7-year-old should have. The flat, controlled composure of someone who had cried so much they'd temporarily run out. He shook his head. Waiting for someone? A small nod. Your mum or dad in one of these rooms? Something crossed his face. He looked back at the floor. His lips pressed together tightly. She didn't push. She sat down on the floor next to him, which she absolutely wasn't supposed to do in scrubs on a hospital hallway, but sometimes the rule book could wait. I'm Sylvia, she said. I work on this floor. What's your name? He was quiet for a long moment. Then very quietly, Seb. That's a good name. Short for Zabini nod. Are you hungry, Seb? I have a granola bar in my pocket that I've been meaning to eat since noon. It's not exciting, but it's chocolate chip. He looked at her sideways. For the first time, something shifted in his face. Not quite interest, but the memory of it. She pulled out the granola bar and set it on the floor between them without making a production of it. Just placed it there like it was a neutral object. He watched it for a moment. Then he picked it up. That was the beginning. Over the following 2 weeks, Sebastian Crane appeared on the 4th floor hallway every Tuesday and Thursday evening, always after 8 p.m., always in those increasingly wrinkled pressed clothes, always alone. A large man in a dark suit was always somewhere nearby, at the end of the hallway, checking his phone, never speaking to the boy, never offering him anything. He seemed less like a guardian and more like a surveillance camera with legs. Sylvia started leaving things. A granola bar at first, then a juice box. Then, because she was who she was and couldn't help it, she started buying a small covered container of warm soup from the cafeteria before it closed, the good kind, not the broth from a bag, and she'd set it in front of Seb and sit with him while he ate. He never asked why she did it. She never explained. They had a language that didn't need words. She showed up. He ate. She asked him one small safe question, and eventually, somewhere in the 2nd week, he started answering with 2 or 3 words instead of 1. He liked trains. He did not like the smell of hospitals, but admitted this place was less bad than others. He had a stuffed dog named Colonel at home that he missed. She didn't ask about his mother. She didn't ask about his father. She could see in the deliberate blankness of his face that both of those questions led somewhere he wasn't ready to go. On the 15th day, the large man in the suit, whom Sylvia had mentally started calling the statue because he moved so rarely, looked at her directly for the first time. She had just sat down next to Seb with 2 cups of hot chocolate from the nurse's station. The statue stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Sylvia noticed, but she didn't think much of it. She should have thought more of it. The Thursday after that, everything broke apart. It was 9:30 at night. The floor was quiet, just the hum of monitors and the soft footsteps of the night staff. Sylvia came around the corner with the usual soup, a lentil this time, with cornbread she'd bought from the cafe on the ground floor, and found Seb's usual spot on the floor empty. She stopped. Then the statue appeared from the doorway of room 412, and behind him was another man she'd never seen before, and then another, and then the hallway, which was always so quiet, felt suddenly very full. The man who came around the corner last was not what she expected. He was tall, not in an imposing movie villain way, but in a way that meant every room he entered had to make room for him. He wore a dark charcoal suit with no tie, the collar of his dress shirt open, like someone had interrupted him in the middle of the evening and he'd come anyway. He was probably in his early 40s, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been tensed for a long time. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, thin and old. He came to a stop about 6 feet from Sylvia. He looked at the soup container in her hands. Then he looked at her. "You're the nurse," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was measured and low, the kind that didn't need volume to fill space. "I'm a nurse," Sylvia said carefully. "Wanna help you?" "You've been feeding my son." Sylvia held his gaze. "Your son was hungry." Something moved in his expression, fast as a shadow. He looked down the hall and said, without turning back to her, "Seb." Sebastian emerged from the doorway of room 412. He crossed the hallway without running and came to stand beside the tall man, pressing close to his side. The man put one hand on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that was automatic and protective, the reflex of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Seb looked at Sylvia. His eyes were wide and not quite afraid. He reached into the pocket of his khakis and pulled something out, walked over to her, and pressed it into her palm. It was a piece of paper, folded 4 times. She opened it on instinct. It was a drawing, crayon, careful and serious. A woman with yellow-brown hair holding a bowl, a small boy sitting next to her. Between them, in shaky capital letters. "Thank you." Sylvia's throat closed. "Sebastian," the tall man said. "Go with Marco." The statue Marco apparently materialized from somewhere and guided the boy toward the elevator. Seb looked back once, then the elevator doors closed. The tall man watched the closed doors for a moment. Then he turned back to Sylvia. "My name is Rafael Caruso," he said. "I'd like to speak with you." "I'm on shift," Sylvia said. "Your shift ended 18 minutes ago," I checked. She stared at him. The audacity of it was so complete it almost looped back around to being impressive. "Mr. Caruso," she said carefully. "I don't know what you do or who you are, but I fed your son soup and granola bars because he was sitting alone in a hospital hallway, looking like the saddest kid I'd ever seen. If that's a problem, I apologize. Otherwise, I'd like to go home." "It's not a problem," Raphael said. There was something in his voice that shifted slightly. Not warmth exactly, but the controlled acknowledgement of something unexpected. "It's the opposite of a problem. That's why I'm here." She agreed to 5 minutes in the family lounge at the end of the hallway, mostly because she was too tired and too stubborn to be afraid. He sat across from her with the posture of a man who never stopped being watched. She sat across from him with the posture of a woman who had been awake for 15 hours and was not in the mood for pageantry. "How long has Sebastian been coming to this floor?" she asked. "His aunt is on the 4th floor, Raphael said. "Room 408. She's been here for 6 weeks. He refuses to go in. He waits." "What happened to him?" Raphael looked at her steadily. "His mother died 8 months ago. Cardiac arrest. It was sudden. Sebastian was with her." Sylvia absorbed that quietly. "He hasn't spoken more than 20 words to anyone since then," Raphael continued. "Not to me, not to his therapist, not to the nannies I've hired, all of whom he's driven out with complete silence and strategic misbehavior." A pause. "He spoke to you. He told me he likes trains." Something crossed Raphael's face so quickly she almost missed it. Not quite a flinch, the recognition of a wound. "His mother loved trains," he said, very quietly. "Neither. What do you want from me, Mr. Caruso?" Sylvia finally asked. "A job offer." She blinked. "I have a job. A better one." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and placed a small card on the table between them. "I want to hire you as Sebastian's private nurse and full-time companion. Live in, at my residence. His therapist says he needs a consistent presence who isn't threatening. Apparently that's you." Sylvia stared at the card. It was heavy stock, almost no information on it. "Just a phone number. I don't know anything about you," she said. "Beyond your name. You know I have a son who drew you a thank you card in crayon. That's not really a background check." He looked at her. "Delacroix Memorial. You've worked here 4 years. Before that, 2 years at St. Genevieve's. You have a brother, Tobias, 24, currently in a treatment program at Thibodeau Regional for the autoimmune condition he's had since he was 14. His last round of specialized infusions cost approximately $38,000. Your father died 3 years ago. The second mortgage on your family home was $95,000. Your current debt, medical and otherwise, totals were $170. Sylvia stopped breathing. She put her hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. "How?" she said. "I know things," Raphael said simply. "That's how I've stayed alive. It's not meant as a threat. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I'm serious." He leaned forward slightly. "Come work for Sebastian. Your brother's treatment is covered in full from today. Your debt is cleared. You'll be paid a salary that will allow you to save for the first time in your adult life." She looked at him across the table. He was watching her with those dark, controlled eyes. Not cold exactly, but sealed, like a room you could see through the window but couldn't enter. "And if I say no?" she asked. "Then you walk out of here, and I respect that. I don't coerce." She almost believed him, almost. She thought about Toby's last infusion, about the look on her brother's face when she told him not to worry, about the weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten what her shoulders were supposed to feel like without it. She thought about Seb, pressing that folded paper into her palm. "I want to meet Sebastian first," she said. "Properly, not in a hallway, before I agree to anything." Raphael Caruso was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. I need Saturdays off, done. And I want to be able to speak to my brother whenever I need to. You'll have a secure phone. Unlimited contact with your family. I make my own rules about when Sebastian eats, sleeps, and spends time outside." For the first time, something that wasn't quite a smile passed over his face. It changed him. Made him look less like a photograph and more like a person. "I hired 4 nannies in the last 8 months, he said. "None of them lasted past week 3. I'm not interested in fighting you about soup." That somehow was what decided her. She rode to the Caruso residence the next morning in the back of a black car with tinted windows, watching New Orleans fall away behind her as they crossed the causeway and turned north into the kind of neighborhood that stopped having sidewalks about a mile before the gates. The house, estate was the more accurate word, sat behind black iron gates at the end of a long oak-lined drive, the trees so old and tall they formed a cathedral overhead. The house itself was antebellum-influenced, enormous white limestone with black ironwork balconies and windows that watched the driveway like eyes, beautiful in the way old, powerful things always were. Cold in the same way. Sebastian was waiting on the front steps. He was wearing the pressed khakis again, but this time his shirt was tucked in. He'd combed his hair. He was holding Colonel, a stuffed dog, grey and well-worn, one ear slightly lopsided from too much handling. He didn't run toward her. He just watched her get out of the car. "Hey, Seb," Sylvia said. He held up Colonel slightly, like an introduction. "This is Colonel. He's excellent," Sylvia said seriously. "I can tell he's seen some things." Seb looked down at the dog. "He's been everywhere," he said. "With me. That's what the best ones do." Sebastian moved down the steps and stood next to her, not touching, just close. He looked up at her. "Are you staying?" She glanced up at the house. In a second-floor window she caught a glimpse of a curtain shifting, someone stepping back from view. "I'm going to try," she told Seb. He nodded. That, apparently, was enough. The interior of the house was exactly what the exterior promised. High ceilings, dark wood, the kind of silence that accumulated over decades. Everything was expensive and almost nothing felt comfortable. There were no toys visible in the common areas, no drawings on the refrigerator. The whole house had the quality of a very elaborate room that someone forgot to live in. The housekeeper, a compact woman named Mrs. Eugenia Broussard, gave Sylvia the tour with the specific brand of formal politeness that meant she didn't like her and was going to let that be Sylvia's problem to solve. The West Wing was Mr. Caruso's and not for visitors. The security staff had their own entrance. Sylvia's room was in the East Wing, adjacent to Sebastian's. Her room had a 4-poster bed and a view of the garden. The closet had been stocked with clothes in her approximate size. Practical things, scrubs adjacent but nicer, soft fabrics in colors that suited her. The ensuite bathroom had a bathtub she could actually lie down in. It was the kindest cage she'd ever seen. She spent the first 3 days learning Sebastian's rhythms. He woke at 7, ate breakfast only if it appeared in front of him without drama, refused anything with the texture of cooked mushrooms, and had a complicated relationship with bedtime that involved a very specific order of routine, and Colonel being positioned on the left side of the pillow, not the right. When he was anxious, he organized things. Pencils by length, books by color, small objects arranged into patterns on flat surfaces. He didn't speak much, but he tolerated Sylvia's presence in a way he hadn't tolerated anyone since his mother, and by the 4th evening, he had migrated from his side of the couch to hers while they watched a documentary about railways without either of them acknowledging that he'd moved. Raphael Caruso was a controlled absence. He was in the house, but he operated in the West Wing or the large downstairs office, and Sylvia encountered him mainly in passing. In the hallway, once in the kitchen very early in the morning, when neither of them wanted to speak to another human being. He nodded at her. She nodded back. That was the whole of it for the first week. Until the night she couldn't sleep. It was past 2 in the morning when she padded down the east wing hallway toward the kitchenette to find water. She was 3 weeks in. She'd started sleeping better than she had in years, but tonight something had woken her, a sound she couldn't identify, low and rhythmic somewhere deeper in the house. She found the water. She drank it, standing at the counter, looking out the small window at the dark garden below. The grounds were lit at the perimeter by low security lights, and she could see a figure standing near the far garden wall facing away from her. Raphael. He was still in the clothes he'd been wearing that afternoon, jacket off, hands in his pockets, looking at the wall. She wasn't going to say anything. Rule number 3, or whatever the equivalent was here, stay in your lane. Don't enter rooms you haven't been invited into. But on the counter beside the kitchenette sink was something that hadn't been there before. It was a drawing done on the back of a paper bag in the crayon set she'd bought Seb for his table in the garden. She recognized the style immediately, the careful, serious lines, the way Seb drew figures larger than he thought was necessary, as if space was the point. This drawing was different from the ones he left for her. It was darker. Blue and black crayon pressed hard into the paper. It showed a car, crumpled. Next to the car, a stick figure with long hair lying very still. Standing over the figure, another figure, tall, in black, arms raised. And from the tall figure, a speech bubble, filled not with words but a single vertical line. Silence. A command. Sylvia's hand went cold where she held the paper. Raphael had told her Sebastian's mother died of sudden cardiac arrest, but Sebastian had drawn a car. He had drawn a body. He had drawn someone standing over that body, making them be quiet. She put the paper down carefully. A floorboard in the hallway creaked. She turned. Raphael was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was barefoot. He looked at her face, then at the counter, then at the drawing. The silence stretched. "He gave this to you?" he asked finally. "I found it here. I think he left it for me." She looked at him steadily. "He didn't draw a cardiac arrest, Mr. Caruso." The muscle in his jaw tightened. He crossed the room without saying anything and picked up the drawing, and the way he held it told her this wasn't the first time he'd seen Sebastian draw something like this. "Come with me," he said quietly. He led her to his office. Not the formal one off the foyer, a smaller room at the back of the east wing she hadn't noticed before, half hidden behind a panel door. It was crowded with files, monitors, papers, a working room, not a performing one. He sat on the edge of the desk. She stood across from him. "Tell me what you think that drawing means," he said. She'd been thinking about it since she picked it up. She chose her words carefully. "I think Sebastian saw something the night his mother died. I think it wasn't cardiac arrest, or not only that. I think someone was there, and I think Sebastian has been trying to tell someone for 8 months, and drawing is the only language he has right now." Raphael looked at the drawing for a long time. "Camille, Sebastian's mother, was in a car accident," he said. "That part is true. The car was forced off the road. The official report says she lost control. The coroner ruled the cardiac event secondary to the trauma of the crash." He paused. "I don't believe the official report." Sylvia let that settle. "You think she was killed intentionally. I know she was killed intentionally. The accident was staged." He set the drawing down on the desk. "I've spent 8 months trying to find the person responsible. There's someone inside my organization, someone I trusted." His voice was flat and disciplined. "Someone who is still in this house." Sylvia felt the air in the room change. "The person who ordered it. I have a name, I suspect. But suspicion isn't proof, and Sebastian saw something he hasn't been able to say." He looked at her. "He's been drawing for you for 3 weeks. He drew you a thank you card before he'd said 10 words to you. He left this," he gestured at the drawing, "where you would find it. He's been trying to tell someone for months, and I know you are the person he chose to tell. What does he need from me? Help me find what he knows. Don't press him. Don't frighten him. Just be present and pay attention to what he draws. He's a 7-year-old boy who witnessed something terrible, and everything he remembers is in those pictures." Sylvia thought about Seb on the hallway floor, the flat, controlled face too old for a child. The way he organized his pencils when he was anxious. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "I've been here 3 weeks, because you are the only person in this house I know isn't involved." He looked at her directly. "You came from a hospital hallway. You have no history with what I do. And Sebastian chose you. In my experience, children and dogs are the most accurate judges of character in existence." A pause. "I tend to trust the assessment. And if I find something, if I figure out what he saw, then I deal with it. That's not your concern. It is if Sebastian is still in danger." Raphael looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet. "I will not let anything happen to him, or to you. You have my word." She left his office at 3 in the morning and lay awake until dawn thinking about the drawing. The next morning she tried something different. She and Seb were in the garden room, the one with wide glass walls and the mess of herbs she'd been letting him water. It was sunny and warm, the kind of late October morning that New Orleans offered like an apology for its summers. She gave him a fresh set of markers and a large piece of paper without making a thing of it, just set them on the table while she worked nearby. After a while, she said conversationally, "You know, my dad used to wear this big old ring. A fish on it. Ugliest thing you ever saw." Seb didn't look up from his drawing. "You ever see a ring like that on someone?" He was quiet for a moment. Then his marker slowed. He picked up a dark brown marker and, very carefully on the corner of the paper he'd been drawing on, drew a circle. Inside the circle, a shape. She leaned forward slightly to see it. Not a fish. A wing. Long and angular, like a geometric bird in flight. "What kind of bird is that?" she asked lightly. Sebastian considered it. He said. Her heartbeat changed. She kept her voice even. "Was it on a ring?" He shook his head. He pointed to his upper arm. A tattoo. She looked at the mark on the paper. A pelican, Louisiana state bird. In a sharp geometric style, she memorized it completely. That afternoon, she was carrying fresh linens to the East Wing linen closet when the door to the adjacent room opened and Harlan Voss stepped out. He was the head of security, a compact, fair-haired man who was always pleasant, always professional, always slightly too aware of where everyone in the house was at any given time. "Mrs. Marchand," he said, smiling. "Everything good on the East Wing, all fine," she said. "Just linens." He nodded and fell into step beside her briefly, reaching past her to hold the linen closet door open. As he did, his sleeve pulled back at the wrist. She didn't look directly. She'd learned from Raphael. You didn't look directly at things. You looked near them. On the inside of Harlan Voss's left forearm, a tattoo, geometric dark ink, a bird with long angular wings, a pelican. Sylvia folded the linen carefully, pressing the crease with both hands, and said, "Thanks, Mr. Voss," in a perfectly ordinary voice. He smiled and walked back down the hallway. She waited until she heard his footsteps turn the corner. Then she set the linen down on the shelf, went to the window at the end of the corridor, and stood there for 60 seconds, breathing deliberately until her hands stopped shaking. When she turned around, Harlan Voss was standing at the end of the hallway. He hadn't turned the corner. He'd come back. He was looking at her with the same pleasant expression, but his eyes had changed completely. "Smart," he said quietly. "Seb drew it for you, didn't he?" Sylvia held her ground. Her voice stayed level. "I don't know what you mean, nurse from the hospital. No agenda, no history." He tilted his head. "You've been here 3 weeks and Seb's already talking. Caruso has no idea how useful that is." He took a step toward her. "Or how dangerous. I'm going to need you to step back," Sylvia said. He didn't. "You're going to come with me." Quietly. "We're going to take Sebastian and we're going to walk out of the gate together. And if you do that without making a sound, nothing happens to you. And if I don't?" He reached for his radio with his right hand. Sylvia grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall beside her. She'd noted it on her first walk of the wing because she always noted exits and equipment. 15 years of hospital floors made it automatic, and she swung it as hard as she could at his wrist. The radio clattered to the floor. She ran. She didn't run for the door. She ran for Sebastian's room. "Seb," she hit the door with her palm. "Seb, come on right now, we're going to your dad." The door flew open. Sebastian was standing there with Colonel under his arm and wide, frightened eyes. He looked at her face and didn't ask a single question. He took her hand. The house erupted. An alarm, sharp and rhythmic, started blaring from somewhere in the security grid. She could hear shouting from the West Wing, and then something that sounded like... She didn't let herself process it. Gunfire, muffled and too close. She pulled Sebastian through the back corridor toward Raphael's working office, because it was the route she knew. The route she'd walked twice at 3 in the morning and once to change linens. And she was grateful now for every late night and every compulsive mental cataloguing of this house's geography. They rounded the corner and nearly collided with 2 men in tactical gear. She shoved Seb behind her. Then Raphael came around the opposite corner, moving with the controlled ferocity of someone who had stopped caring about looking civilized. He had 2 of his own men with him and a look on his face that was not safe for anyone standing in opposition. He took in the scene in under a second. He moved to Sebastian, crouching to his eye level, hands on his son's shoulders, scanning him physically for injury. "Seb, you're okay, look at me. Are you hurt?" Sebastian shook his head. He pointed at Sylvia. She grabbed the fire extinguisher. He looked at Sylvia. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not the sealed window thing, not the controlled distance. Something unguarded and slightly fractured. "Voss," she said. "It's Voss. He has a pelican tattoo on his forearm and Sebastian saw it the night your wife's car was forced off the road." Raphael was already turning. One word to the men beside him, and they moved. She took Sebastian back to his room and sat on the window seat with him, Colonel between them, and she held his hand, and they watched the garden below fill with lights and movement, and the specific chaos of a large house defending itself. She answered every question he asked in a clear and steady voice. She did not lie to him. She did not tell him everything was fine when it wasn't. She said, "Your dad is handling it. It's going to be okay, you were so brave." He leaned against her side. After a long time, he said in that small, precise voice, "I knew someone had to see the drawing." She put her arm around him. "I saw it." "I know," he said. "That's why I left it for you." When it was over, really over, when the house had gone quiet and the lights outside had settled back to their normal perimeter glow, Raphael came to the doorway of Sebastian's room. He was slightly disheveled, the careful architecture of him coming slightly apart at the edges. There was a cut on his temple, not serious. He looked at his son, asleep at last against Sylvia's shoulder. Then he looked at Sylvia. "Voss is in custody," he said quietly. "His men have been dealt with." He paused. "He's been talking to the organization that killed Camille for 3 years. It was never going to end until we found the connection." "Sebastian gave you the connection," Sylvia said. "Sebastian gave you the connection." He moved into the room, sat carefully on the window seat across from her. The space between them was careful and not quite neutral. "You should have run." When he cornered you in the hallway, most people would have run. Running with Sebastian seemed worse than standing still. It was, statistically speaking. He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you more than I can calculate right now. I wasn't doing math," she said. "I was doing the job." He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, "Tobias's next infusion is scheduled for Thursday, Dr. Fontenot's clinic, the best practitioner in the Gulf South. It's already arranged." She felt the tightness in her shift. "Raphael, Mr. Caruso will do fine," he said, but the corner of his mouth moved. "Mr. Caruso," she said, accepting the correction. "Thank you." He nodded. He looked at his son. Something in his face was different now. The sealed room opened the smallest amount, just enough for light to come through. "He's going to want to tell you everything about trains tomorrow," he said. "I know," Sylvia said. "I already looked up the Louisiana Railway history." Raphael looked at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. Then he reached out and adjusted the blanket over Sebastian's feet with the particular gentleness of a man whose hands spent the rest of their time being something harder. "Get some rest," he said. "We have a lot to talk about in the morning." 7 months later, the yellow house on Constant Street in the Garden District had a new front door, painted the exact shade of green that Tobias had always insisted the house should have been. The hydrangeas their mother had planted were enormous this year, sprawling and blue, and every time Sylvia drove past, she thought of the housekeeper at Caruso's estate. Which was funny because Eugenia Broussard had eventually come around, the way difficult women always did when you proved you weren't going anywhere. Tobias was in partial remission. Not cured. The word cure was still something they used carefully, like good china, only on appropriate occasions. But his last panel had the specialist using phrases like remarkable progress and sustained response. And her brother's eyes had a light in them she'd been afraid she would never see again. The debt was gone, all of it. She'd stood in the kitchen on Constance Street and opened the final confirmation letter from the last billing department, and she'd sat down on the floor and cried for 20 minutes. Not from sadness, but from the bizarre and overwhelming sensation of weight, leaving a body that had stopped registering the weight. She still worked. She'd kept that condition in the quiet renegotiation of her arrangement with Raphael. She would remain Sebastian's primary companion and medical support in the house, but she also maintained 2 days a week consulting at Delacroix, because she was a nurse and she intended to remain one. He hadn't argued. "Is Sebastian your first commitment?" She'd said yes. That was the end of the discussion. Sebastian was talking. Not quite the way children who hadn't witnessed what he'd witnessed talked. Not yet. But he was in school 2 days a week with a specialist he seemed to genuinely like, and at home he was a presence. Loud sometimes about trains and dogs and the fact that Colonel needed a new left ear. He'd drawn Sylvia 43 pictures since October, she'd counted. They lived on the wall of her room in the east wing in a long irregular line, and she was going to need more walls soon. On a Saturday in May, Sylvia was sitting in the garden room reading when the door opened, and Raphael came in. This was no longer unusual. In the last 3 months, the sealed room had opened enough that he sometimes came to find her, instead of waiting to be found. He sat down across from her, without ceremony. He had a mug of coffee. He always had coffee, and he put it on the table and looked at her with the expression she'd finally found a word for. "Careful." He looked at her carefully, as if she was something he was still learning the dimensions of. "Sebastian told me this morning," he said, "that you are his best person." Sylvia smiled at her book. He told me you let him stay up until 10 last night watching a documentary about the Orient Express. That information was supposed to be private. He's 7. Everything is public. She looked up. It was good of you. He needed that. Raphael looked at his coffee. I'm learning, he said quietly. What he needs. He stopped. It's been a long time since I felt like I knew how to do any of this. You're doing fine, she said. He looked at her, the careful look but warmer than it had started. I'm not going to say you're only here for Sebastian. We've passed the point where that's entirely honest. She held his gaze. No, she said. We passed that point a while ago. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. The same deliberate, unhurried motion he used when he was saying something he'd thought about a long time before he said it. Saturdays are still yours, he said. I know, she said. Outside, Sebastian came running across the garden towards the glass door, Colonel dangling by one leg, shouting something about a documentary he'd found about the Louisiana Southern Railroad, and could they all please watch it right now? Raphael's hand tightened briefly over Sylvia's before he let go and turned to open the door for his son. And in the way of all things that start with a single small act, a granola bar on a hospital floor, a bowl of soup in a quiet hallway, a drawing left somewhere it would be found, the rest of the story began.